I want to tell you a story today that changed my life and is going to leave you like, wow, oh my gosh. It's a story about forgiveness, and we all want to forgive people, but it's terribly difficult. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes when someone does something to me, I'm like I want to forgive you because it's like drinking poison if I don't and thinking it's going to hurt you. But at the same time, if I could just forgive them, all would be well and I could move on with my life. They could move on with their life, whether we're friends or not. So I want to tell you a story about a powerful way to simply forgive and put everything in perspective. I'm telling you, stick with me because you're going to remember this story forever. It comes in the New Testament, regardless of your faith. You're a Buddhist, you're a Muslim, you're an atheist, you're an agnostic. The stories in this book are absolutely amazing. And the first time I ever heard this story was by a guy named Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago and then interpreted through a public speaker named Eugene Lowry. And I want to share that story with you on forgiveness. I'm going to read the way Jesus told the story first, and then show you how Lowry interpreted it so that you can remember forever. And as I interpret it, tell you the story. And here's how the story goes. You ready? Finally, after the introduction, I'm telling you, this is going to change how you think about forgiveness and put it in perspective. Put this down here. Okay. Here's the story. I'm reading out of the document here. And it's in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 and following, in case you want to document it. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked. Peter was a fisherman. He followed Jesus around. He said, Lord, which meant boss, kurios in the Greek, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother or my sister who sins against me? Should I do it up to 7 times? I can relate to that. Can you relate to that? Because sometimes it's like, bruh, how many times do I need to forgive you? Will you ever learn? I want to forgive because it helps me. It's not even about them, but it's so hard. Jesus' response is dramatic. I tell you, Peter, not 7 times, but 77 times. 7 was a number back in the day for completeness or totality. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven, so Jesus is talking about heaven. He claims that he'd been there before and that he was going back. The kingdom of heaven is like a king. So he's telling a story here. Is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began his settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since the guy was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his kids and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Gosh. At this, the servant fell on his knees and he begged, please be patient with me. I beg you, I promise you, I will repay everything that I owe you. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his own fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, please, sir, be patient with me, and I will pay back everything I owe you. But he refused. Instead, he went off and he had the man thrown into prison until he could pay his debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were very upset and outraged. They went and told the master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in again. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all the debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailer to be tortured until he could pay back all that he owed. This is how your heavenly Father will treat you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Holy cow, there's so much to that story. And it is a story, so not everything is literal. Certain people stand for certain things. And the idea is, did you catch the big point behind the story that Jesus told? It's not just any kind of story, it's a parable. And when Jesus told a parable, people would lean in to listen because people naturally like stories, right? You like stories, I like stories, they like stories back then. People after us will like stories, so we lean in. But the catch of the parable is there was a sneak attack and it was going to whack you in the back of the head to jolt you when you finally got the aha kind of moment that Jesus was really packaging within the story. So what was the story that Jesus was really trying to, or the point that Jesus was really trying to share in this story? Lowry interprets it beautifully, and the way he talks about it is this. In this story, there's a man who's deeply in debt. Dave Ramsey would not be happy with him. He owed a whole lot of money. Not only that, but he owed all of this money to the king of all people. So he tossed and he turned at bed, trying to think, man, how am I going to repay all this? Stress filled his bones. Anxiety filled his mind. He's thinking, man, should I sell the farm? Take an extra job? I already took an extra job. How many more extra jobs can I have? I'm not making money fast enough to repay this debt. And who's hiring that pay me a high enough salary to repay this debt? So he's freaking out, man. Then his worst nightmare occurred when he walked to the mailbox one day and opened up an envelope with the king's signature and seal on it. He had been summoned to the inner chamber of the king. As he looked and read the envelope, or the letter in the envelope, he fell to his knees, scared, trembling. His wife said, what happened? What's in the letter? But he didn't tell her why, because he didn't want her to be burdened with the burden that he had. And like a lot of people out of work with massive debt and no hope, he was contemplating suicide. Instead, he left home, went across the country until he reached the palace, and with weak knees, he climbed the flight of the stairs until he reached the top of the stairs, and feeling his heart rate jump, palms sweating, he went through the double doors to await the audience with the king. Now, if you were listening closely to the story, when I was reading the text, the ancient document from 2,000 years ago that Jesus told, you notice that Jesus did not mention stairs in the story. And that's probably an inadvertent admission. There were stairs in the story. There had to have been a flight of stairs, because you never go to a seat of power without climbing a flight of stairs. Even in Illinois, where I'm at, where there's no hills, you have to climb stairs to get to a place of power. And back in the old days, when they build a country courthouse, they bring in the bulldozers and create a hill so that they could build a flight of stairs. Today they may put in a ramp, but still, you would have to approach the seat of power in an uphill way. The man climbed a flight of stairs, went through the double doors, was ushered into the inner chamber of the king, and stood there waiting until the king made his appearance. The wait made the weight of debt on his shoulders feel even heavier. Then the king finally comes in the court. The man bows dutifully. An aide arrives from the side carrying in a huge ledger. He opens it, flips through the pages, opens it to the page where the man's name appears in the upper right-hand corner. Then the king looks at the bottom line on that ledger sheet where the man's name is at and says, "Servant, it says here, you owe me a lot of money." "Yes, sir." "Do I read this right? You owe me 10,000 talents. Yes, sir." "I want my money." "Yes, sir. I'm calling in the debt today. I want my money now." Oh, yes, sir. No, sir. I don't have 10,000 talents, sir." The king turns to the aides who brought in the book, and they begin a discussion about selling this servant, this man, and selling his wife and selling his children into slavery disposing of all of his personal property to recoup what little they can from this massive debt. And when the king turns around, he finds the servant down on the carpet on his knees. And the servant looks up to the king and says, "Sir, please have mercy on me. I have kids at home. Please have mercy. I'll lose my entire life. I will repay you everything. Just give me a little bit of time." And you know what the king did? He did better than just give him a little time. He reached into the ledger book, took a hold of the page, ripped it out. Right? He ripped out the ledger page. Takes the ledger page. He rips it up. He says, "This is your debt. I forgive your debt. You are now free and clear. Go in peace." Can you imagine what that servant experienced? Such utter ecstasy. I think the tears dried up quickly and then were replaced with uncontrollable, joyful weeping. When he got up, he never touched the carpet again. He must have like levitated or floated through the air, dancing. He didn't have to open up the double doors. He simply slipped through and didn't have to touch a single step on the way down. The man was free. He no longer had a care in the world. His future was bright. His life was starting fresh. He couldn't wait to get home and talk to his wife and his kids again without the anxiety and stress and burdens on his shoulders anymore. We might have hoped that that's what happened, but that's not the way the story goes. He instead trudged his way out of the king's presence, plodded down every single step, and when he gets to the bottom of the stairs, he finds another servant who owes 100 denarii, $20. That's 3 months' wages for the average man in the days of Jesus, $80 a year. What's $20 in contrast to 10,000 talents? That's $10 million in U.S. currency. This man, who had just been forgiven a debt of $10 million, grabs a man by his throat for $20. And he says, "Pay me what you owe me." Now, notice that Jesus has the fellow servant get down on his knees, pleading with him, as the first man had done before with the king. He says, "Man, just give me a little time, please. This is my life. I'll pay it all back. Please give me just a little bit more time. I will take care of this." But the man refused. He didn't give him any more time. In fact, he didn't show any mercy whatsoever. He didn't give him anything. Instead, he summoned the police officer and said, "This man owes me money. He's not paying me back. Send him to jail. Take him to jail now." And the man, now satisfied that he had taught this fellow servant a lesson, returned to his home, free and clear. The crowd who had gathered at the bottom of the stairs, however, did not like what they saw and heard, and they were not satisfied. In fact, they went back to the king and said, "You won't believe what just happened at the bottom of the stairs." After hearing the story, the king said, "Well, the two of us need to have another conversation." The king summons the servant back into the presence, away from his home across the territory. So the guy gets back on his horse, rides across the land to go up to the king's court. He gets across all that land, dismounts from the horse, goes up the flight of stairs, through the double doors, and into the inner chamber. The king comes in. The servant bows dutifully. And the king asks, "Weren't you here just a little while ago?" "Yes, sir. If I remember correctly, I had the ledger. On the page which your name appears, and at the bottom of the line on that page, it said that you owed me $10 million. Is that right?" "Yes, sir." "Well, if I remember correctly, I told you I wanted the money now. Yes, sir. And you got on your knees and begged for mercy, right? Yes, sir. And do you remember what I did? I ripped up the ledger sheet out of the book and told you to go in peace. Oh, yes, sir. Now, what's this I hear about what you did once you left my inner chambers? By the time you got to the bottom of the stairs, you seized a man who owed you $20 after I had forgiven you $10 million. Is it true that you, in fact, grabbed somebody by the throat for $20 and then threw him in jail? That is correct, sir. Well, said the king, I have news for you. You know that jail cell where your buddy sits? Yes, sir. Well, that happens to be a suite for two. Now you go and join your buddy in that cell, and you stay there until you pay me the full $10 million. And as far as we know, he's still sitting in that cell. He got what was coming to him. But the truth is, we've only touched on the tip of the iceberg of this story because we really haven't caught the punchline that comes in the smack in the back of our heads from this parable yet. The debt said $10 million, and I presume $10 million is a significant chunk of change for most of us. But inflation has softened the debt. The fact is, nobody back in that day could owe $10 million. Not just owe and pay, but they couldn't even owe it. Jesus is making a joke out of the debt. You see, the entire annual revenue in the Roman coffers all over the globe in that era, in that time frame, was approximately, get this, $850,000. With $850,000 during the story that Jesus told, during this time, you could pay all of the judges, all of the road builders, all of the armies in the Roman Empire, all of the dancers, all of the teachers, all the everybody's, because $850,000 was all that there was, and still have plenty left over for the rubies and emeralds and all the nicer things of life. Even Herod the Great could not owe $10 million. So why would Jesus, in this document and fascinating stories, why would he make such a ridiculous statement? Well, let's figure it out. Herod the Great couldn't owe that. So when Jesus collects this crowd of people around him and starts telling this story and says, there once upon a time was a servant who owed 10, he's making the story up to make a point. There was once upon a time a servant who owed 10 million, and before he could even finish, do you get it? The servant owed 10 million, a servant. So the crowd choked with laughter. They got the joke back in the first century. And then in the middle of the tale, Jesus has the servant on his knees begging for what? Time, not just any time, a little time. Do you know how much time he would really need? At $80 a year average annual wage in that time period, without interest, if you had to pay interest, you'd really be in difficulty. To pay back $10 million would take approximately 125,000 years. The way Jesus put it was that he owed $10 million. He was just, in other words, way over his head. There's nothing that he can do about it. And even with the humor of this story, though, I've always been troubled when I read the story because I've read it multiple times. I've been troubled because, wait a minute, the hero to the tale seems to be the king. And the king forgives the servant, but then just minutes later takes back the forgiveness. But that's not what I was told about forgiveness. I've been told that if you forgive somebody, that's it. You can't say to me this morning, hey, Aaron, I forgive you. And then this afternoon, catch me in the hallway of the hotel and say, hey, I've changed my mind. So what's this deal about the king who forgave $10 million and then takes the forgiveness back? I want to suggest this with Lowry, that it isn't a story about a king who forgave and then takes it back. It's a parable. It's a story. Jesus, we give him a little poetic license here. He knows what he's doing. This is really about a story about a servant who was offered the forgiveness for a debt beyond his wildest freaking imagination, and he refused to accept the forgiveness. He never let himself off the hook. And you and I, so often in life, we don't let ourselves off the hook. We replay these mental stories, have a mental video, a rehearsal about things we've done, and we beat ourselves up over and over and over again. We never let ourselves off the hook. It's literally killing us on the inside and in our heart and breaking our relationships. Now, here's how I know that that's why it happened in Jesus' story. I know because what happened at the bottom of the stairs simply could not have happened had he really accepted and received forgiveness. It would have been utterly impossible. If the guy presented himself and said, hey, I owe you $20, he'd say, what, $20? I mean, imagine this if you were in the scenario. You bought a mega $1 million ticket in today's world. The first one ever, because the jackpot had reached 900,000, or let's say $900 million. It would be irresponsible not to buy one, right? So now it's Sunday in your world, and you're at church, and in Sunday school, they have a special offering. Churches like to have special offerings. And somebody nudges you and says, hey, I forgot my wallet, man. Could you lend me a couple bucks? I'll drop by later, at your house today, and I'll pay it back. So, you're the nice guy, nice lady, and so you give him $10. The time passes, it's now Monday morning, and he still hasn't brought the $10 back. But at 8 o'clock in the morning, you see a story on your cable news or on your streaming news. There was one winning ticket in the drawing last night. So you sit up and you pay attention. You're not thinking much about it because, who wins the lottery, right? But then they say it was sold in Illinois, and you live in Illinois. So now you're slightly interested. Okay. At least you have a story to tell about how you also bought the ticket in Illinois. And then you discover it was sold at the gas station in Champaign, Illinois, where you bought a ticket. You start to get excited. You start comparing the numbers as they read them off. 1, 2, the numbers match. 4, 5. You have all 5 of the draws. Then you look down at the jackpot number and it matches as well. You just won $900 million before taxes. Imagine what you're feeling. Think about how your eyes are circling in both directions. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with all this money? I got to hide my ticket. I got to hire somebody to take me in to get this ticket and get the money. I'm so excited. You can't breathe. You're speechless. And the first thing you're going to do is call your buddy from church yesterday and say, hey, when you bring in my $10? Is that what's going to happen? No, it's impossible that that's what you would do. That's the last thing on your mind is a debt of $10 that somebody owes you. You just received a gift that dwarfs any debt that you will ever be owed or are being currently owed. The $10 is not going to cross your mind unless you don't believe the state will pay off the lottery ticket. Well, that's what happened to the man in the parable in Jesus' story. He never let himself off the hook for the debt. There's something that he did wrong because he did not believe that he had truly been forgiven. And even if he had believed it, he had not received it. He had not accepted it. Why wouldn't he receive the gracious forgiveness that he had been offered? I'll tell you why. Because he went home he was raised in the same church that I was raised in, and maybe the same church that you were raised in. You remember the text in the lesson that you got? It says, never take anything from anybody. Everybody needs to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And do you remember the lesson that said anybody can become anything if they just work hard enough at it and hustle and buy hustle stickers and hustle posters and just put 10X in their mind? Just go out there and go for it. It's the American capitalistic way. I was taught in Sunday school, and maybe you were too, that it's wrong to take candy from strangers. And even worse, to take candy from a friend. Why? Because then you're in debt to a friend, and you should never be in debt to a friend. Oh, we learned that lesson very well. He couldn't take the gift like that. He didn't deserve it. We've learned the lesson so well, you and I, watching this. we can't even take a compliment these days. If I say to you, oh man, what a lovely dress you're wearing this morning, what do you say back? These old rags, are you serious? I bought this on discount. Isn't that what we say? Imagine it's your birthday, right? And the doorbell rings. You go to the door and you look through the screen. It's a great dear friend with a package in hand. What is it to you? What is it you do not do? You don't look at the package. It's embarrassing to stare at the package, particularly on your birthday, right? Pretty soon, when you let the friend in, your friend who's got the package, you're still not going to look at the package because it would be, just embarrassing. But your friend holds the package so high, you can't even see your friend without seeing the package. And so you say something dumb. You say, oh, is that for me? No, I was just carrying it through the neighborhood. Of course it's for you. It's your birthday. Happy birthday. So now, with great reluctance, this is what we do in embarrassment, you take the package and you just kind of stare at it for a while. Pretty soon you look up and say, should I open it? And they're like, no, just put it up over the fireplace and just stare at it for all I care. Of course you're going to open it, right? You take out the present and you say, oh, it is so lovely. And then you say the first smart thing you've said throughout the whole conversation when you say, thank you. But what else do you do at the same time? Oh, you shouldn't have. Of course they shouldn't have. If they should do it, it would not be a gift. It would be a payment for services rendered. That's the meaning of gifts. And the servant who was summoned in this story across the territory and up the flight of the stairs, that could have been you and me. In fact, perhaps it is. Let's just try it out. Let's head across the territory and up the flight of stairs to see what you and I would have done. Having been summoned, we go up the flight of stairs and through the double doors, ushered into the inner chamber of the king by an aide. We wait for the king to arrive. The king comes out with a huge ledger book, plops it on the table. Here's my ledger book. Plop it on the table. And you're in the inner chamber. And all of a sudden he opens it up to the page where your name is in the right-hand corner. And on the bottom of the page is how much you owe. And it says here that you owe me a whole lot of money. In fact, is this figure right? It says 100 trillion that you're indebted. $100 trillion? Is that correct? And every last one of us watching this, me talking, we would have to answer, that is correct, sir. Indeed, I am heavily in debt to you. Even 125,000 years of effort of doing all the right things would not suffice to repay the debt that I owe you. Do you know what the king does? Do you know what the story in the New Testament says? God looks, your heavenly Father, whether you believe in him or not, through Jesus, looks at this ledger and says, you owe all of this, and there's not enough time in all the world to pay. He rips it out of the book. He rips it to shreds. He looks down at us, and he says, I forgive your debt. You are now free. You're clear. Live your life in peace. And do you know what that means to those of us who can receive, not just hear it, but receive forgiveness and no longer replay all the mental bad stuff in our life and beat ourselves up all the time? For those of us who are able to let ourselves off the hook, would you let yourself off the hook? Do you know what that means? It means a lot of things, but I'll tell you the first thing that it means. It means nobody's going to have to ever remind us how to behave. It means nobody's ever going to have to tell us all the rules to follow. It means nobody's going to have to tell us how to act. It means nobody's going to have to tell us what success means. Nobody's going to tell us, what to do when we get down to the bottom of the stairs with other human beings. Later in the New Testament, when Jesus goes out The disciples were around him, and Jesus turns to them and he says, as you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Freely you have received. Freely give.